The government has been caught making the housing crisis worse by artificially inflating land and house prices.
It's not an up to number, it's a number.
Up to means they've either bought or built 800.
Well, it's the same thing.
It's not. Buying and building is different.
No.
Different
because they don't get built unless they're bought. It's the way the market works, mate. That is how it works.
This is a bombshell finding, guys. The same government that stands at a podium and promises to fix the housing crisis has now been exposed for artificially inflating the price of land and homes. This is big and this is serious. At this point, I generally do not know what we are supposed to believe anymore. Do we believe the speeches and the press conferences, or do we believe the documents, the Senate hearings, and the on-the-ground practices that tell a completely different story? Because what has just come out, guys, this is absolutely shocking. Hey guys, it's Scott here with another daily property update. Now, in today's update, I want to talk about these recent reports and recent data which have revealed something that should make every Australian pause. The government has been making the housing crisis worse at every single step of the process. And when I say every single step, I actually mean every single step. You want to build a home? You need land. They have deliberately and artificially inflated land prices. You want that land rezoned and approved? They have buried it in red tape and delays. You need infrastructure so you can actually live there? They charge you for it in hidden costs. You decide, fine, forget building. I'll just buy a finished home and finally get my foot into the market. They will secretly show up and outbid you with your own tax money. I'm talking the government sitting there outbidding you. And if you think that sounds like clickbait, I'm telling you right now, I have proof of every single one of those claims in today's video. This is coming straight out of the Senate inquiries, parliamentary hearings, official reports, and data that for some reason barely got any media attention. These documents were sitting there, dormant, buried. Unless you went digging, you would never piece it all together. And that's the problem. When these pieces are floating around separately, nobody connects all of the dots. Nobody steps back and says, hang on, the government is actually doing all of this at the same time. So I've done that for you right here because this is your future and your taxes, and you have every right to know what is really going on. Let's break this down properly. Let's start with land because this is where the entire crisis begins. Since 2000, the median price of a block of land in Australia has risen more than 500%. It now sits around $391,000. Over the same period, construction costs rose roughly 150%. So the house did not become 6 times more expensive. The dirt did. And this is the part nobody explains properly. Australia is not short on land. There is plenty of land. We are one of the largest countries in the world. The problem is ready to build land. Land that has been approved, rezoned, and released for housing. Over the past 2 decades, the supply of new blocks has not kept pace with population growth. Rezoning gets delayed for years. Development approvals drag on. Urban growth boundaries are tightened, which simply means cities are restricted from expanding outward. So while demand keeps growing, the supply of approved land stays tight. When supply is constrained and demand keeps rising, prices rise. That is basic economics. If government released land faster, reduced red tape, and opened up new areas for development at scale, developers would build sooner. Supply would increase sooner. The national housing target of 1.2 million homes would become realistic. But that is not what has happened. And here is the second layer that makes this so much worse. In the past, governments funded infrastructure through general tax revenue. Roads, sewer, drainage, power connections. That is what your taxes are meant to help pay for. Now, the government expects developers to pay for those infrastructure costs up front if they want to build a new estate. So rather than spreading that cost across the whole country, which is a small amount, they say to this one developer in this one estate, you've got to find all of that money just for this estate, and that goes into the end price, the buy price for each individual builder. It makes these projects not sustainable. It makes them not launchable. It makes them not sellable. No one wants to buy them, meaning none of it gets built. So let's be very clear about something. Developers are not charities. They do not absorb these costs. They build them into the price of land. So now you are paying twice. You pay high income tax to build infrastructure, and then when you go to buy a new block, you're also paying infrastructure costs embedded into the land price. So you are paying through tax, and you are paying again when you buy. And on top of that, the land itself is already expensive because supply has been deliberately restricted. That is how a $400,000 or $500,000 block becomes normal before a single brick is laid. This is not a shortage of dirt. It is a shortage of approved land combined with costs loaded into it by policy decisions. That is step one of how the housing crisis gets worse. Now let's move to the next layer, because if land supply manipulation was not enough, what came out in Senate hearings makes this even more serious. Government agencies that were created to fix the housing crisis have been buying existing homes and off-the-plan properties. That means homes that would have gone to first-home buyers or everyday Aussies are instead being bought by the government with your tax money. And in one of the Senate hearings, it was raised that certain homes that were going to sell for $900K were outbid by the government and purchased for $1.3 million.
Happy to take them. So the minister in the chair tonight is the same minister that actually told the Senate Estimates Committee that they were in fact buying off the plan. So they are buying properties that could be owned by Australians, but instead the government of Australia is buying properties. So they are buying, not building. So they're using taxpayer funds to actually compete with Australians in the market, which is another reason why this agency is in a lot of trouble. And then you come to the spend quality. So the average cost of a new build is about $500,000. But in some cases, this government is spending $1.3 million to build a new property.
Think about what that means. That $900,000 home might have sold for $920,000 or $930,000 in a normal auction with normal Aussies. But when the government steps in with billions of taxpayer dollars behind it, it does not behave like a normal buyer. It can outbid aggressively. It can stretch beyond what households can afford. So now you are not just competing against investors. You are not just competing against the bank of mum and dad. You are competing against the government itself with your tax money. And because the government has access to large pools of your tax money, and by the way, this is being spent by government officials, it's not their own money. Do you think they care about money what is not theirs? It is your money that they are using to meet a policy target. Now, these officials with your money can push prices far beyond what private buyers would have paid. Of course, private buyers care about the price they pay. An official with your money does not. So it's not only land prices that are being artificially inflated, it is not only infrastructure costs that you are paying twice, you are also bidding against a state-backed buyer that can move the market higher. And when that 900,000 home gets bought for 1.3 million, the comparable sales in that area shift upward. The benchmark resets. This actually leads to higher prices for everyone in that area across all properties. That is layer 2. Now look at the numbers, because this is where narrative meets reality. Total mortgage lending has exploded. In the December 2025 quarter alone, loan values passed 115 billion. Average loan sizes climbed to around 692,000. Investor lending now accounts for roughly 39% of the market. So money is flowing. But here's the detail that matters. Loans for new dwellings have fallen, have gone backwards. Owner-occupier loans for new homes dropped 9% over the year. Investor loans for new homes fell 4%. Land and construction loans remain roughly 58% below their 2021 peak. If we were truly ramping up supply to meet a 1.2 million home target, new construction lending should be booming. But it is not. At the same time, Treasury projections during the Housing Accord period point to around 900K homes being built rather than the 1.2 million target. That is a shortfall of around 250,000 dwellings. And the Senate is also saying that investment into housing in the future is also declining. So while the headline says 1.2 million homes, the underlying data shows pressure and slowdown. That disconnect absolutely matters when it comes to housing affordability. Now, here is where the contradiction becomes very, very obvious. First home buyer schemes have expanded, deposit requirements have been lowered under certain programs, stamp duty concessions have been rolled out, shared equity models have been introduced. All of these measures increase purchasing power. They bring more buyers into the market. They allowed households to borrow more. These programs stimulate more demand, more buyers, and we can see that in the data. First-time buyer loan volumes have risen dramatically. Average loan sizes have increased sharply in several states. More demand, higher prices, bigger mortgages. So demand has been supported, but supply has not been freed at the same speed. Land does remain tightly controlled, infrastructure costs remain embedded, construction lending remains below peak. When you stimulate demand without unlocking supply, prices absorb the difference. The pressure does not disappear, it shifts into higher valuations. That is exactly what we are seeing. Now let's bring it back to the big promise. 1.2 million homes by 2029. That's what Albo and Kuru absolutely told us. To reach that number, annual completions would need to stay consistently high. A decade ago, strong years saw around 220,000 dwellings completed annually, not 240,000. More recently, we are closer to 170,000 per year. Officials have acknowledged publicly that achieving the full 1.2 million will be challenging. Guys, that's code for it will not happen. So here is the full picture. Land supply has been restricted, infrastructure costs have been pushed into land prices, government agencies have entered the market as large buyers, demand-side policies have expanded borrowing power, new construction lending remains very, very weak, forward projections fall short of the headline target. All of these forces combined altogether mean we are not getting out of this housing crisis, meaning over the next decade, house prices will continue to inflate. Now, it's important you realize this is not about ideology, it is about mechanics and math. Housing affordability depends on land availability, construction capacity, credit conditions, and also policy design, all working in unison to fix the problem. Right now, they are not aligned. The base cost of land has shifted up sharply, infrastructure is loaded into new estates, additional government demand competes with private buyers, supply indicators are under massive pressure, the target is not lining up with the projections. If this continues, the housing crisis will not ease, it will set in stone. Young Aussies will continue to feel locked out of a market that becomes structurally more expensive every year. That is the reality the data is pointing to. This means that property investors will be in the business of providing rental accommodation to a whole generation of Australians. Now, is that fair? Now, I generally want to hear your comments, guys. Leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Do you think our government are doing a good job? Do you think that we will find a way out of this housing crisis? This is your daily property update, your update on property, the economy, money, and your financial future. I'll see you guys at the next video.